Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Soulful Abundance Festival. I'm your host, Elise Preston, and today I am so thrilled and so excited to be here with Alexandra Roxo. Welcome, Alexandra.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. And Alexandra is actually someone that I have had the honor and the privilege to be mentored by. And I was actually just listening to your podcast earlier this morning. So I feel like I've kind of been hanging out with you already.
Oh, nice. Awesome. I love that.
And Alexandra is an artist, best-selling author, speaker, and teacher. And her career traverses many genres, but has a through line of exploring the female body and the intersections of spirituality and sexuality. And Alexandra has been making art, writing, and sharing her heart publicly for nearly 2 decades about modern spirituality and the feminine faces of the divine, embodiment as healing and practice, and the paths of expression of the soul through art as writing and liberation. And Alexandra, I would love, I know, as you shared in your bio, your journey has been spanning over 2 decades.
Mm-hmm.
I would love if you could, really walk us through and share your own journey of healing and how you found your way to this very interdisciplinary path that you're on now.
Mm-hmm. Well, the funny thing about it is I think it's a journey of humaning. And I think that we were taught to be humans in a really particular way. It's funny, I've been watching this television show based on the book A Brave New World. And the characters in the show go through this process called the conditioning process. And they actually get a little laser in their arm when they do something that's outside of their conditioning. And I started thinking about that our society is not too different. It's especially if you're in public school, you sit in a chair, you sit still, you be quiet, you learn from the books that someone else curated the history for you. You go to PE and you learn sports, and you don't really spend as much time on anything that's spiritual or service or for nature, or, there's just so much there. And so I feel like for me, at a young age, I was oh, I actually am called, in my soul, towards something else. Sitting in those public school rooms in Georgia, I knew there was more to life. So a big part, I feel there's the healing aspect of each of our soul's journeys in human form, but there's also the liberation from the constructs that don't work for us. And for some people, they get one set of constructs and other people get another set of constructs. And we're constantly being reconditioned by them, right? So you can be a woman who's oh, I've gotten out of this idea that I need to be thin, right? To be lovable. Yes, I did it. But then you're being reconditioned by society all the time. So you may think that you had a victory and that you overcame your desire to be thin, but then you're still seeing 90% of every woman on television or magazines thin. So that you're getting reconditioned into that. Right. So I'm telling you all this because a lot of my own journey as a human has been about liberating myself from the things that weren't resonant for me. And my liberation has been through creativity, through writing, through playwriting, filmmaking, poetry, whatever, because it is really one way that the soul can kind of find itself and see itself. And I support other women in finding their own liberation through many of those same areas, but that can also be not necessarily as a public offering. That can be, oh, I want to be able to just feel good in my body. I want to be able to let go of being the good girl and always smiling, which we worked on.
I relate.
And I still my conditioning around being a good girl and being nice is so thick that I catch myself all the time saying thank you 3 times. And I'm girl, why are you saying thank you 3 times? You might as well kiss the person's feet. you know? And
Yeah.
anyway, so there are just all these subtle ways that we embody either giving up our power, giving up our like sovereignty is not the right word, but like giving up our grace, our beauty, or we learn, we learn, oh, that's actually not me. That's not the real me. That's like a conditioned behavior pattern. So anyway, I found a lot of liberation and through art. So in college, I was like, wow, I want to liberate myself from this idea that like I grew up in the Christian church. And so from this idea that I'm a sinner because I'm a woman that likes to dance or move her body in a particular way, um, or has different sexual desires, I want to liberate myself from that. So I wrote a play that was really about that. And again, in the hopes that it would also help liberate other women who are also kind of stuck in this idea that like, oh, it's sinful to like want to have a spanking or bite on my shoulder, like super silly, but in the big picture, that all of those things add up with gravity to our lives. So, to make a long story short, to make a lifetime short, my path has really been about that, where some people's paths are about like, okay, I need to make money by a certain age, I need to make a family by a certain age, and maybe that is their truth, maybe it came from conditioning, I don't know, but for me it's like I need to liberate and express. And it's been cool because I've actually gotten some great press from that urge, but the urge didn't come like the creative urge wasn't, oh my God, maybe I'm going to be written about in the New Yorker and in Variety and in the New York Times. And like, maybe I'm going to see my movie on a big screen and maybe I'm going to get an award and maybe millions of people will watch my work. That wasn't the urge. The urge was like, I want to liberate myself from something. I want to feel the truth of who I am.
Yes. Ooh,
Mm-hmm.
so powerful. And I really love how you started from this super early point in your journey of just being a young person and having this urge, this yearning, this call for something deeper, and noticing how we aren't really introduced with lots of opportunities to spend time connected to nature or service or our spirituality, and how now through your work and your community building and how you connect with others, it's like being such a powerful source of how we can reconnect with that, how we can welcome more of those opportunities into
Yeah.
our daily lives. And I love how liberation is just such a powerful theme that
It's just been on my heart lately.
such a through line through all that you were just sharing,
Yeah.
and just constantly really seeking out like how creativity, how self-expression, how connection with the body, how connection with each other can support us with experiencing deeper liberation in our own lives.
Mm-hmm.
I would love if you could share a little bit about some of the ways, or just, a brief introduction to the ways in which you and your work really can support women, particularly with being able to access deeper liberation in their own lives. Because
Mm-hmm.
I think we do talk about spirituality in very like esoteric or philosophical terms, but I love the ways in which you really support us with like grounding that into the body.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Folks who might be more new to that approach would love to
Mm-hmm.
share a bit about
Yeah.
that now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's where I don't really um subscribe anymore to a lot of the sort of common new agey spiritual kind of mainstream isms. Some of them I still do and I catch myself in and I'm like, oh, when am I gonna get this out of me? And some I actually really appreciate, but um we're in bodies, right? Like, so it's cool for someone to be like, I'm a spiritual person now, but what does that mean? I really would love everyone listening to actually write down, what does it mean you're spiritual? And like, write it in a note in your phone and go back to it and every few weeks or month or whatever, and ask yourself, is this still my truth. And it should be changing, actually. So your definition of what is your spiritual self, if you look through like the eyes of the masters, like that thing is changing. It's not a fixed point. It's not a definition you got from Deepak Chopra. It's a definition you find in the depths of your soul. So I think that there's this idea that to be spiritual means what? To be good. I'm being good, clean, healthy. And what? Spirit is an essence that lives inside of us that is eternal, right? So it's like when you consider yourself a spiritual person, you're relating to this eternal essence inside of you, right? But I think people confuse spiritual with wellness, right? Wellness is about like creating a life maybe that's sustainable, that's peaceful, that's mindful. That not isn't necessarily spiritual, right? Like that's you really ask yourself, like, what is my, am I creating a life around wellness? Awesome. Or am I a spiritual person, which means I acknowledge the infinite essence inside myself and all beings, which mean I respect and treat all beings as equal to me, an animal, a tree, the earth, which means I also honor that there is a greater mystery that I don't understand, that I will never understand. It also means that death is something that I have to acknowledge and accept. It could come any day, and I have to bow to it with such deep reverence. So being spiritual means acknowledging the depth of the shadow and the muck of humanity. And if you're a spiritual person and you're afraid to acknowledge that there's murder and rape and awful things that happen, then you're not acknowledging the essence of all. That would be more of a puritanical spirituality, right? Or like a bypassing. So I'm only giving that perspective because it's like, if you really want to be a practitioner, someone who says, okay, I'm really coming into the honoring of myself as this infinite being. I'm a soul that's embodied in this form. I'm going to die. I'm going to be gone, as Elise and Alexandra will be totally gone in a blip of time. But there is something infinite about me that's going to remain.
Yes.
And I'm bowing in honor of that this life, right? So if I spend my whole life just trying to get the perfect body and money, that's going to die when I die. But my spirit, if I'm a spiritual person, I believe my spirit's eternal. So I'm going to invest at least as much or more there, right? So how you do that now and how you begin kind of liberating the soul within your human form. One way that I help women is through emotional freedom, through the freedom to feel all the different scale of emotions, to let them move through the body and through sound, right? Sounds super kindergarten and simple, but it's terrifying for most women. If I asked you in front of your whole audience right now to like scream and say, fuck you, motherfucker, and to share your rage, I'm sure you have rage about something in the world, if not tons of shit.
Right.
But if I asked you to do that right now in front of me and your audience, you'd probably be like, a little bit like, maybe later.
Ooh, still feels edgy. Yeah.
Edgy, right? So it's like when I help women to feel those edgy places, whether it's despair, sadness, rage, deep sexual urges, whatever it is, so that you integrate those aspects of your being, and so you're not afraid of yourself or afraid of your human condition, right? Because essentially, if you're a spirit who came to be in a body and walk the earth, if you're afraid of, oh my God, I'm afraid of rage, I can't do it, then hey, great place to start working there and playing there.
Yes.
So that's one place that I support women is in an emotional liberation, also bringing the emotions into the body and moving them out. So learning how to alchemize the emotions so that they're not like rolling you, right? You're not getting hijacked by them, but you let them kind of move through you like a wave. And so you become an artist in that sense where you're able to let the rage fully pass through you, have a full life, and then it moves on. Right. And so, but if it's like being constipated, if you like clench it in, it doesn't leave. It just, you can be like, okay, I'm going to divert my attention over here into my happy, but like the rage is still underneath. And I love characters in movies like that, actually, who have like the rage under the smile. Like it's such, I mean, watching art and cinema is such a beautiful way to study the human condition and to go, oh my God, like this woman is embodied. I think we might have done some of that in our container together, right?
Yeah, we did that too. Yeah.
Yeah. To be able to look at different human experiences and go, oh my God, that terrifies me. And so then we play
Mhm.
with the embodiment of that.
Yes.
Because it's essentially embodying life. It's being unafraid of life. It's not
Mhm.
God or something outside of us. It's like, oh, I'm now less afraid of living, you know?
Yes.
So those are two ways to work with women: liberation through emotion, through the body,
Mhm.
freeing those things, getting out of patterned ways of being. So, like, we all have different masks and personas, especially as women, that we're really good at. And most of them, not most of them, a lot of them formed from trauma or from, childhood patterns or situations, society, religion, ethnicity. There's so many different, and some of those styles of being are actually like in a tribal sense are like create belonging. And some of those styles of being actually create separation. And so it's kind of acknowledging, oh, what are my own behaviors, the way I hold my body, the way I speak, the way I love, the way I fuck, the way I make money. What of these things are actually from behind a certain mask or persona?
Yes.
Um, so I work with women on all of those things because I've
Yes.
worked on that stuff in myself as an artist, as a writer, as a creative, like being like, wow, there's like a deep hidden bitch inside of me. And sometimes she comes out, my friends see her, and like, I need to get to know her. Like, I need to get to love her and see why part of her is so helpful to me. Um, and then also, just like we said before, acknowledging that some behavior responses actually are just like zombie responses.
Mhm.
Like we just keep doing them until somebody says stop.
Right, right. And I want to kind of circle back to a comment we were making towards the top of this question, and pulling apart and making this distinction between being really focused in and centered on wellness versus spirituality. And
Yeah.
I think that there isn't a lot of conversation about having a lot of clarity between those two things.
Yeah.
And particularly now in this moment with like the just proliferation with so much content around wellness and spirituality. I love the ways in which you spoke to just really having discernment between what those things are. And if we're saying that we want to be embodying these aspects of spirituality, in what ways are we actually going into the depths, like connecting with the essence of our soul and spirit, working through the shadow and honoring ourselves as these infinite beings, rather than staying maybe more in some of the places that feel a bit more safe and known and focusing on nutrition or sleep or whatever those things are that are like, okay, I'm
Yeah. I mean,
I'm
that's
practicing wellness.
great. Do that, but don't call that spiritual.
Right. But is that spiritual? Right. So just getting curious, like asking yourself.
I
Um,
mean, if that's spiritual, then I can tell you about my defecation schedule, and that's spiritual too. Like
sure. Right, right. And so it seems like very simple when we state it in these ways, but I think that's not a conversation that we're having a lot of the time. So appreciate just like bringing that to the surface. And then I also really love the ways that you were talking about how this process of connecting more deeply in with our spirituality also allows us to have just more of a relationship with life in which we are more open, more expansive, more courageous, being less afraid of
yeah.
what it means to remove those masks, to know ourselves,
Hmm.
to, oh, yes, did you want to hop in
I
there?
was gonna say, like, and maybe the word that people can start to play with instead of saying I'm a spiritual person is that I'm cultivating awareness.
Mhm.
And because awareness, it doesn't, I mean, spirit has a religious tone to it. The word spirit is used across spiritism, spiritual, like Holy Spirit, like
Yeah.
communing with spirits. So that's cool if that's your thing. That's my thing. I love that. I love the religiosity of spirit, of traditions across the planet. But if it's like, if you're really just interested in cultivating awareness about patterns, awareness about your trauma, awareness about the way that your conditioning is, that's different than connecting with a spiritual essence, which is almost like a dancing light in the room that you feel and that you experience as God, Goddess, divine, something numinous,
Right.
something that is beyond your understanding. So
Mm,
it's something for just to consider. Like, are you into that? I am. I love fairies, like goddesses. I love different traditions. I love listening to spiritual music, gospel music. Like, I grew up Christian. I've been to the caves in Nepal. I've meditated there. I've sang with the Hare Krishnas. Like, in my heart, I am trying to get high off God. I want to get close to God. But not everyone who claims to be spiritual has, I mean, and that's pretty extreme because I'm an extremist in that way, but not everyone who's spiritual is connecting to that infinite essence. Some are just cultivating awareness, and that is okay.
yes, that's beautiful too.
Just be clear about it, or simply becoming more mindful. I'm not into that word so much, but I know you use it in your branding, and it
Mm,
actually is very helpful for people. I appreciate that over spiritual because it's specific. It's like mindful. Oh, you just like throw your coat on the floor. If you become more mindful, you go, oh, maybe I'll hang it up. Like,
same.
great, you do that. Like, like, don't be
Yeah.
a dick, become more mindful.
Yes, yes. And I love that. Welcoming is that element of like curiosity, awareness, mindfulness, and knowing that the process of cultivating that more deeply in our lives opens us up to so much more, like so much more presence, so much more of that ability to be in a relationship and like contact with life. And as we talk a little bit about, the numinous extending and reaching towards things that are beyond our understanding, the mystical, the magical, the
Yeah.
spiritual. Would love to be able to chat a bit with you. I love how in your podcast intro, you talk a little bit about what it means to have reverence for this incarnation and
Mm,
really be connecting more deeply with our souls. And for folks who are curious about, and I know this is a very individual and like personal journey, but curious about ways to really begin to step more deeply into that,
mhm.
wondering what guidance and insight you might offer there.
Yeah. Well, stop being a zombie. No, just kidding. So I say that like lovingly because it happens to me too. Like what that means is, oh, you just wake up and you're on autopilot and you're just like in get shit done mode all the time. And that's really, you're totally often missing, or not you specifically or me. I mean, the greater you or the we are often missing the magic of life. So slowing down, right? Like taking a moment before you get out of bed to just honoring and acknowledge that you're back in this body. If you have a partner in bed, like taking a moment to look at them, take a deep breath, like laugh, giggle, tickle, say a prayer. But,
Mm,
really bringing ritual, which means presence and slowness, right? Like I've never seen so, I mean, imagine you could do like a speed racer ritual, but most rituals involve slowing down and really being deliberate about things. So I always say to invite more magic into your life. First, slow down, and then be a be an attractor point for magic.
mm,
Right. So you have to have space. I talk about this in my book, Fuck Like a Goddess, Heal Yourself, Reclaim Your Voice, Stand in Your Power. Like I say that God's not going to be like, okay, you're like, okay, I have in my schedule, my Google Cal from 1 to 2 to connect with spirit. Okay, cool. So spirit, you got to show up between 1 and 2, right? Okay, because then I've got Pilates. It's
right.
like, that's probably not going to happen. If your
Mm,
life is scheduled back to back, the moments where you get this gorgeous aha, where a butterfly lands on your arm, or the other day I was sitting and a dragonfly like came and sat with me and then left and then sat with me and then left and then sat with me. And I was just like, this is magic, fucking wow. But it's like I wasn't sitting on my phone. I was just sitting and looking. Put the phone down. These are our magic gets robbed.
mm,
you know, like go watch some dystopian movies or TV shows and you can see like we're not too far off from forgetting the
At all.
magic of being alive.
Mhm.
So phone down, time where you're in nature, slow down, become a receiving point for magic means make your house feel magical, inviting, create ritual all around you as much as you can, right? Like make your house feel like the most sacred you spot that is right for your essence. To be an attractor point for magic, synchronicity, spirit, if that's what you want to call it, angels, whatever it is. Like you have to have the space and you have to have the presence that's not like in high anxiety fear place, right? So
Right, right.
cultivating a calm, loving, open, receiving, receptive presence takes
Mhm.
time, takes energy. I'm not like that every day. Some days I'm definitely not a receiving magnet for magic.
Same
Like
here.
I but I come back to it. In my book, I have something called Surrender Saturdays, where on Saturdays, you turn off your phone, you create your nest, your magical den, whether it's in your yard with a bunch of blankets and pillows and books and tea and chocolate and music and laying and looking up at the sky, or whether it's in your bedroom, you create a whole day where you just and you can also call this, my partner studies qigong and the Tao, and so you could call it the yin field. So like if we live in a more, everyone's heard of yin and yang, right? So if we live in a more yang based society where you're more outward and you're kind of like right, taking risks, moving forward, to surrender into the yin field is like to go into this place of like, it's almost like you sinking under the water of your being. And so when I haven't done that for a few days, I start to get a bit cranky.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I need to like just go take one of those 2-hour baths and stare at the wall or listen to like Enya or something like sort of like that fills my like some spot. It touches some spot in my mystical freaky self, like
Yes.
1995 self. I'm a 90s girl. I grew up in the 90s. Um, but yeah, creating those rituals for yourself so that there's space in your days. And then knowing, okay, sometimes like that may not happen for 2 weeks. Like I'm like on a book deadline or whatever, but then coming back to it, you know?
Yes, always finding those ways to return. And I think it's so beautiful, this phrase that you were using, becoming a receiving point for magic. And that just invites, to me, like it feels so just like fun and beautiful and exciting.
Yeah. And is this like, is that
Nothing magical about that.
no, there's nothing magical. And it's terrifying because I mean, we all do it all the time. So it's just, I think balancing it. It's like if we're gonna spend like, you know, however many hours the stupid phone tells us like this, we need to spend this many hours like this. Ah, like looking at the sky, dancing, you know,
Finding the
making
opposite,
love.
like the medicine. Ah,
Yeah, yeah,
yes, yes, yes.
yeah.
Such a powerful reminder. I'd love to be able to chat with you a little bit as well about how your relationship with abundance has been
Mhm.
evolving since stepping into entrepreneurship.
Yeah. So I grew up with parents that had all kinds of money stories that I inherited. I mean, we all inherit the stories around. It's just one more thing we're conditioned around, right? So,
Huge. Yep.
and usually conditioned by society and by our families. And um, I grew up with like my mom and I were always struggling for money, and my dad was like always kind of like saving and not really into sharing so much. Which I talk about this stuff in my book too, because it was definitely one place that I had to do a ton of healing and reconditioning myself around. Because then I went to school to be an artist, and you know, primarily for the last 20 years, I've been paid. My paying jobs have either been until these last 5 years where I've had this, my current business. But before then, I was like, you know, I had my work as a filmmaker, writer, director, which sometimes paid, But then I always had a side job. So I was a personal chef, I was a cocktail waitress, I was a nanny, I was a this, that. Um, and it's interesting because like I think women's side hustle, like I think it's kind of interesting that it involved like cooking, cleaning, and taking care of children and serving men drinks. You know, it's like very dated, but
For
like
sure.
that was how I could get paid,
Yeah.
you know? Um, and I had student loan debt, but I was like really determined to just keep being an artist. And eventually I did get paid really well to be a director. And it was
Mm.
funny because it was actually after I created my coaching and healing and mentorship business. I had started Moon Club, my first membership, which was back in 2016, before there were any anythings on like Instagram and stuff, which is funny because it was just an idea, a random idea I had. And I'd been leading, moon circles like every other, kind of feministy, witchy gal since I was like 18 in New York. So nearly 20 years now. So I didn't think I could really monetize that, but I did. And that was cool, but it wasn't enough to live off of. So I was still in the film. I was still like directing little things here and there. And then I got passed on this pretty big directing job for United Airlines.
Mm.
And I ended up being a year-long directing job where I made a good amount of money, paid off all my debt.
Yeah.
And there was this moment where I said, there are two things that are important as I tell these stories. It's like I was living in a housing situation that sucked, and
Mm.
I knew I needed to live alone, and I wanted to live on the beach,
Yeah.
ocean front. And I thought, this is crazy. And I had quit my personal chefing job, and and I had started my coaching business, but I didn't really have, it's just like a little bit here and there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought, this is the worst time to move out of this cheap place with roommates and into my own apartment. But I
Mm.
have just enough to do it. And this is the worst time to quit this personal chefing job, but I can't do it anymore. And there was like the stroke of God. And the minute I quit the personal chefing job, the minute I said it out loud to my friends, I got a text saying, I've been awarded the United Airlines job. And
Amazing.
that job, like I had put in a bid, I think 6 months before. And, I hadn't done much commercial work. I'd done a web series, I'd done documentary work, I'd worked with Vice, I directed an independent feature film, but it was all mainly on art and expression. Wasn't like a director for hire so much. Um, but then I got that job and I made enough money to, during that year, keep keep building my coaching business, my mentorship business, my writing. And I think I even got the book deal at the end of that year, paid off all my debt, lived in my beachfront, oceanfront apartment in Santa Monica, um, which was tiny as fuck, but really cute. um, and that was the last service job that I had, and I was done with a service job. I thought, I'm done serving men and getting paid for it. Like essentially my radiance is being bought, right? My presence, whether I'm feeding a man in the house that I worked in New York City, or in Marina Del Rey where I was, I'm like smiling and being cute and pretty in the house and cooking and cleaning or feeding or taking care of kids. And I was like, I'm really done with this. But I also admire that was a risky and privileged thing to do, because I was in like $70,000 debt,
Yeah.
and it was risky. And also there are millions of women who don't have that choice and have no choice, who, that's great to take care of kids and cook and clean. And there's nothing wrong with that. I do cook and clean, but I don't get paid for it. I just do it for my partner and and I love it. I think the difference for me was doing in environments that felt kind of toxic. That being said, a lot of the world does that, and I really have such deep honor for all of the women who take care of all the children and clean all the houses and cook, especially for the rich people, especially for the asshole businessmen who come in and look at them like they're nobody. Because I felt like that, and I was a college grad, and I had like some success as an artist, and I still felt so uncomfortable in those scenarios with like the businessman who comes home and looks at you like you're nobody. Anyway, I'm just saying that to presence that it was a huge leap to change and to get out of that toxic kind of work environment. And then the other work environment was actually became just as toxic, which was working for corporate, so that was working, I guess I shouldn't have said the brand, but because now I'm like, we won't linger on that long. But working within a corporation means that you have a lot of people overseeing your actions. So that was new for me as well, but it ended up being a blessing to have that opportunity for a year because I paid off my motherfucking debt.
That's amazing. And
that was a journey. And I will say I had to have a lot of grit to stick with that journey. Like I had to hustle up that chefing job because I was broke and my coaching business wasn't working enough. And then when it felt bad, I had to pray to God, like, I need something else. And then the other job came. But the main thing I will say is that while I had all these side hustles, which are not terrible, like to have in general, I stayed focused on my other work, whether it was writing a play, whether it was writing a script, web series, whether it was developing a TV idea, or whether it was starting my coaching and mentorship business or Moon Club or whatever. I stayed focused on that. And Elizabeth Gilbert talks about in her book, Big Magic, like she's like, I don't want to quit my side hustle too. I don't, because then it puts so much pressure on your day job, rather. It puts so much pressure on your art or your budding creative thing to create financial, return.
Yeah. Right.
And it's really taken me the last 6 years, and it's still up and down. You're working for yourself. You have to market. You may go through a phase where you feel kind of quiet or you're changing, right? Because you create a business that's kind of in a certain vibe, but then you're maturing. And then people may not like who you're maturing into. So then there's like a transitional phase where like, oh, people really liked empowered Alexandra, who was like, yeah, I'm empowered, but now I'm integrating like more wild, free and soft and like poetic Alexandra. People may not like her as much, but like I haven't gotten rid of empowered. I'm just not out there going, you can do it. Because I think that now I've matured past that, which is okay. But all of those things are a part of having your own business. And I feel like women sometimes get stuck in like the same thing because it feels safe. And so they don't allow their business to mature with them. Yeah. Or their brand, rather, whatever you want to call it. So, but now I think I had to like get that moment that I just told you guys, that story was like being in the hellfires of it, where you're like, my money story is getting burnt to the ground and rewritten. And it hurts and it's scary. Just like anytime we break through a limit or anytime we change around something, it's going to feel quite intense. The alchemy of transformation. But after that, I created financial security for myself. And I always think if I would have married young and like had someone else to lean on, which I did have partnerships at times that I did lean on when I was a broke artist, like, and that was really sweet, but I would always pay them back. But like, but in these past few years, I've been single and I've started my own business and like, kind of built everything from scratch again after a television show that I had filmed a pilot for, produced, co-directed, and was in. It didn't go to series. So, which means like it didn't get picked up. So when that happened, I was like, fuck, back to the drawing board. And that was the time where the last 6 years I've created what I've created now, written a book, had created a coaching mentorship business, membership, all these things that have continued to be fruitful. But it's not a guarantee, like it's not like it takes a lot of work to keep things moving. Yeah.
Well, I so appreciate you being so open and vulnerable in terms of sharing all of the different ways in which your journey has had these twists and turns. And there's been so many unknowns, and just being able to be in that seat of again, like tuning in with yourself and discerning what are the transitions, moving to another coast, shifting from one way of sharing your creative work in the world to exploring coaching and mentorship, like um, all of these different aspects of growth and transformation. As you shared, you're like, oh, when you're in it, when you're in like the alchemy of transformation, it's not cozy, it's not comfortable, it's not cute.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's really, really challenging. But I love that you incorporated that reminder in there. Even when things were hard, even when you maybe had to focus your attention and energy more on like pulling together your resources and like being sustained, that you still always maintained this connection to your art, to your creativity,
Yeah.
to your passion. There was always the way
Yes.
you were keeping that, and not allowing that to like fall away, not allowing that
Yeah.
to be overshadowed by some of those more like urgent, maybe needs, right?
Yeah. It's kind of a freaky aspect. I'm like
Mm.
holding tight to the artistic vision, like in that kind of like, yeah, even if you don't have a lot of food, just like,
Right.
I
Even if,
must be a writer.
in what ways, like, can each of us still hold on to whether it's creativity or whether it's something else, right? Whatever
Yeah.
that is like anchoring us to
Mhm.
our soul's gifts, our essence, what we're here to offer and share. And one of the questions that's been really fun to be able to just hear from each of the guests around is around some of your current growth edges in your life and your practice, and some of the things you're really excited about learning and diving into.
Yeah. Um, well, this last year, I sort of got tired of the online marketing. I was like, my artist soul is starting to be like, no, like,
Mm.
how do you create marketing that doesn't sound cheesy as fuck and like that doesn't sort of sell off parts of your soul to people, And so the last year, I've really examined like what is mine and what do I sell and what do I not, And I had tried that route of being like, hey, I was broke. And then now I've been making six figures. And now I have a fancy car. Now I have a house. And I was like, that just feels gross to me. But that's my personal feeling. And that's not a judgment about others'
Sure.
reality. Um, and kind of looking at the coaching business and like going, where are there people that are not selling their lives off, but maybe selling an idea or a concept or being experts in something without having to prove, look at me, I'm an expert in it. And it's
Mm.
strange because it's like this very abstract or kind of vague space. Like anyone can say they're a coach, anyone can just be like an expert. And I started to just bother me. I was like, started to bother me like, where do I fit into this? Like I'm an award-winning filmmaker and a best-selling author, and I've gotten a lot of press, and I've gone to school and I've studied embodiment and theater for healing, and I've studied all the like I've been doing shamanic and plant medicine ceremonies for 10 years, and I've been really on this path, but I don't want to shout about it all day and all night. I don't want to be like, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. And I may want to say look at me for like the fun and the free stuff because I love inspiring women in that way, but in terms of the getting and like the acquiring and more clients, more numbers, more money, I was just like, oh, something about this feels off. So I I've looked at it as a chance to expand into new areas of study, and I won't say much more than that yet publicly, but it's been that kind of feeling inside of like there's a new phase that is calling me. Has It's taken a year and a half to take action on it because it's a big scary thing that I'm moving into, but really exciting. But it's taken a year and a half to go, okay, I no longer want to be like making money just as a coach. I want to have a bit more cred than that,
Mm.
um and not be in this kind of unregulated space.
Yeah.
Like
Ooh.
that's like based on oh, someone is pretty or they have the life, or like, who are these experts? Like, what have they studied, or with
Mhm.
whom, or why, And I always tell people, just be discerning about who you mentor with, coach with, learn from. Like, there's incredible people also that, and I'm not saying that I'm one for traditionalism. It's more of integrity, that's the difference. And so I definitely feel like there's a space for really honoring, like, what's the integrity of the coaching space, how
Yeah.
much people charge, like how they're selling, what they're selling. And just for me, that's been an edge in my business. It's just like
Mm,
asking myself what's true.
yeah.
Yeah.
Asking yourself what's true, finding that space of deep integrity with how you're moving forward. And I
Yeah.
that because I think sometimes, I mean, as you were sharing earlier, we're in this very like fast-paced hustle mentality culture. And even when we are in the space of coaching and supporting others, we may not be applying that same like curious lens on how we're functioning ourselves in terms of like slowing down, asking ourselves those questions, making sure we're
Yeah.
staying in deep integrity with how we're showing up.
Yeah.
So love that as just yeah, just love that share as a space for people to also get curious about what that can look like in their
Yeah.
own work and their practice.
Yeah.
And so want to be able to start to weave our conversation to a close by
Yeah.
you the question that I ask all of our guests, which is, what does soulful abundance mean to you?
Mm. Well, I think abundance is that, like, it's like lush. It's like when the trees are just like dropping fruit and there's enough to share, but pass out to loved ones and others. And um, the flowers are generous with their fragrance, and so we become generous flowers with others. We give our fragrance, and um, nature's abundance is my true role model, because it's so generous, continues to be generous. No hoarding. Nature doesn't hoard. An apple tree doesn't hoard. A rose doesn't hoard her beauty and doesn't hide it from us. She gives until she dies, and so on the soulful level, I suppose that could be a metaphor for us opening and extending our beings into the world, our souls, into everything we do.
Mm.
Whether you're tying your kid's shoe or combing their hair or making your partner breakfast or writing something, but extending the abundance that life has offered us into everything you do, because life is already giving us abundance all the time. It's like overflowing. So if you don't see that, then I would say start there before you start thinking about money. Because if you start seeing the abundance that life and nature are giving you, I bet you money will flow in in a different way.
Yes, love that. Life is giving us so much abundance, always
Yeah.
rooted in that truth.
Yeah.
Mm. And so I know that you have a generous free gift that you're sharing with our audience, and was wondering if you could share a little bit about that practice and
Yeah.
how our audience members can stay connected with you.
Mm. Well, I have a few guided practices that are in the space of embodiment and emotional alchemy, and women love them. And I have one of them free on Insight Timer as well. And some women emailed me the other day and said, I do this every morning. And I'm like, shit, I better make a new one. I only put one on Insight Timer for free a few years ago. And I lead a lot of live ones where I have women in a room and we're working through processes together. So those are actually my favorite, but I have two that are recorded with incredible music by my friends Aya and Tyler. And you can use them every morning if you need a guided practice. And it uses breath, sound, and movement to open, to soften, to become more deep you and less conditioned you. to let emotions flow through you, to soften into some of those emotions that are uncomfortable. And so, yeah, you guys will have that. And also, I go into what this process is all about in my book, Fuck Like a Goddess, Heal Yourself, Reclaim Your Voice, Stand in Your Power, which is published by Sounds True. And I go into a lot of the why, the how, the scientific, the spiritual, the personal in that book. So I would really recommend. There's so many different also exercises for healing around the body, sexuality, tons of rituals as well, and stories about my own journey, which are offered as just points of connection for each of us as women to really see that we're so similar.
Yes.
Yeah. And then I also have a podcast called the Holy Fuck Podcast, where I'm really interested in talking to people that are doing things in the spiritual space, or bringing a different lens of spirit and sacred into the artistic space, but that are a little off the beaten path, or a revolutionary, visionary, rule breakers, rebels, people that are questioning in a certain way. And so those are great. I have one that just came out today with Alex Ebert, the lead singer of Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros. I had an amazing poet, Rachel Rabbit White, who was the first one. And there's just, they're
I love
really
the
cool.
Milana Snow episode recently too.
Yeah, and Milana Snow, she was incredible. We got into talking about our issues with men. We barely scraped the surface, but it was still really deep. I was like, I could talk about that for hours with you. So yeah, please subscribe and review and stay connected there as well.
Yes, and highly, highly recommend Alexandra's book and podcast. The book, especially, I had a chance to read last fall, and such a transformational experience. And it is, packed with so many different journaling prompts, exercises, opportunities for deep reflection. So get your journal ready, like be ready for a deep
Yeah. And you don't have to do it all in one sitting,
reading. Right. But thank you so much, Alexandra, for joining us. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to connect with you, and also be able to just share the really powerful liberatory ways in which you are showing up in the world, and inviting all of us to, as you said so beautifully, live more from our depth and less from our conditioning. And for everyone who's been tuning in, thank you for joining us. And I look forward to catching you again tomorrow for our next set of interviews. Be well, everyone. Thanks, Alexandra.